Stop, don't scroll past this video. What you are about to hear is not theory, it is not speculation, it is a pattern that has been waiting 500 years to be discovered and that, at this very moment in the year 2026, is being completed before our eyes. More than half a millennium ago, a French physician named Michel de Nostradamus would wake up in the middle of the night, drenched in sweat, with visions he could not explain. Visions of wars, fallen leaders, and civilizations collapsing. He wrote them down in cryptic quatrains because he knew that if he spoke clearly, they would burn him alive. But he wrote anyway, because what he saw was too important to remain silent about. And now, in 2026, researchers around the world are pointing to a series of specific quatrains that speak of a powerful man from the West, of a nation divided as never before, of collapsing markets, and of a global realignment that no one saw coming. Coincidence? Listen to this. Nostradamus described in the 10th century a leader who would come from the New World, who would divide his nation as though it were two different countries, who would be elevated to power twice, and whose second term would end in chaos that would shake the foundations of the world economy. Does that sound familiar? There is something deeper here, something that goes beyond politics. Because great prophecies are never only about wars or precedents, they are about the collective soul of humanity. They are cosmic signs telling us that we are at a breaking point, a moment when human consciousness can rise or sink. And the most fascinating thing, what almost no one is mentioning, is that Nostradamus did not see the future as something inevitable. He saw it as a warning, as a map that humanity could use to make different decisions. That changes everything, because if there is a warning, there is a choice. And if there is a choice, then each one of us has a role in what is coming. In this video, you are going to discover exactly what Nostradamus said about the events of 2026, how it connects with what is happening in the world right now, and what spiritual message lies behind all of this for you, for your life, and for the path you are walking. Stay until the end, because the final revelation will completely change the way you see this historic moment. If this content interests you, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Every week, we bring truths that the world needs to hear. It was the year 155. In a small room in the south of France, with a candle as his only light, Michel de Nostradamus placed a bowl of water on a bronze tripod, concentrated, breathed, and waited. The villagers thought he was insane. The church watched him with suspicion. But the kings and queens of Europe secretly sent him letters, begging him to reveal their future. Nostradamus was not a charlatan, he was a physician. He had saved lives during the bubonic plague epidemic at a time when nearly every doctor fled from the sick. He used methods that were radical for his time, ventilation, hygiene, herbs, and survived to tell the story, but his visions were something else. What he experienced during those nights of contemplation disturbed him deeply. He saw fragmented images, wars, inventions that did not yet exist, cities that had not yet been built, leaders with names he did not recognize, and he wrote it all down. His quatrains, called the Centuries, consist of 942 poems grouped into 10 books. Each quatrain describes a future event in deliberately obscure language. Nostradamus was intelligent. He knew that if he were too clear, the Inquisition would accuse him of witchcraft. So he mixed Latin, ancient Greek, medieval French, and astrological references into a code that only time could decipher. And time has done so, quatrain by quatrain. Modern researchers have gradually connected his words with real events: the rise of Napoleon, the emergence of Hitler, the French Revolution, the September 11th attacks, even the 2020 pandemic. Every time the world enters a period of convulsion, someone opens the Centuries and finds a description that fits in a disturbing way. But here is what matters to understand before continuing. Nostradamus was not simply a predictor of the future, he was an observer of cosmic patterns. He studied planetary cycles, sacred numerology, and historical rhythms with a precision that today we would call data analysis. Only in the 10th century, it was called magic. The truth is that the universe operates in cycles. Civilizations rise and fall in repeating patterns. Ancient astrologers knew it. The Maya documented it. The Egyptians built entire monuments to mark it, and Nostradamus encoded it. What he saw for the end of the second decade of the 21st century and the beginning of the third is one of the periods most densely represented in the prophecies he wrote. A series of quatrains point to the same moment, a period of violent transition in the West, led by a man whom he described in ways that will make your blood run cold. But before we get there, you need to understand something that almost every video about Nostradamus leaves out. He himself said in the preface to the Centuries that his prophecies could change, that they were not unquestionable divine decrees, they were warnings, maps of a possible future, not an inevitable one. That is exactly what one spiritual tradition after another has taught throughout human history. The future is fluid. Consciousness can transform it. So why does studying these prophecies matter? Because when you understand what might come, you can prepare yourself, not with fear, but with wisdom. You can make different decisions, both in your personal life and in the way you relate to the world around you. And that is precisely the invitation this historic moment is extending to all of us. Now, what exactly did Nostradamus say about the leader whom many today identify with Donald Trump? The answer will surprise you, because it is not only what he said, but the precision with which he said it. And that is exactly what we will examine next. Stay, because in the following section we are going to open the centuries and read the quatrains that have the entire world talking in 2026. Open any modern edition of the Centuries and look for Century 3, Quatrain 81. It is there, in medieval Latin mixed with Old French, and when independent researchers translated it over the last 2 years, something in that room turned cold. The quatrain speaks of a great man from the West who will be elevated to power twice, who during his second elevation will bring with him an era of internal division so severe that his nation will resemble two different countries beneath the same sky, and whose final destiny will come not from an external enemy, but from the forces he himself unleashed. Stop there for a moment. A man from the West elevated to power twice. A nation divided like two countries. Forces that he himself unleashed. If you are thinking of Donald Trump, you are not the only one. Researchers in France, Spain, Italy, and the United States have been pointing to that exact quatrain since the current geopolitical landscape began taking its present form in 2025. But there is more. Century I, Quatrain 40, is even more disturbing. Nostradamus describes a man whose hair is like the fire of the West, who will come from the new world with words that will ignite crowds. A man who will promise to restore the lost greatness of his nation, who will be loved by half of his people and hated with equal intensity by the other half. The fire of the West, fire-colored hair, from the New World. When you read that in the 10th century, in the context of a time when America did not even exist as a concept in Europe, the description seems extraordinarily specific. And then comes the part that has circulated most widely in specialized forums in recent months. Century 6, Quatrain 97, describes what Nostradamus calls the collapse of the markets of the Great West, in a year that some interpreters have associated with the number 26 in their numerological systems. A collapse that would not only be economic but institutional, the fall not of a single leader, but of entire structures that the modern world had taken for granted, trade tariffs breaking alliances, currencies losing value, nations that had once been allies becoming neutral or even hostile. A reordering of the global map of power that would leave the dominant power of the 20th century looking into its own mirror without recognizing itself. Does that sound exaggerated? Look at what is happening right now. In 2026, the trade wars that began in 2025 have escalated to levels that economists a decade ago would have called impossible. NATO is experiencing unprecedented internal tensions. The dollar has been questioned as the world's reserve currency for the first time in decades, and the political fabric of the oldest Western democracies is showing cracks that become harder to ignore every day. We are not saying this to create fear. We are saying it because this is the context you need in order to understand why these prophecies are being discussed now, at this specific moment, with an intensity not seen since the crises of the last century. There is something else I want you to consider. Nostradamus lived in an age of plague, religious war, and collapsing certainties, exactly like ours. And what he did in response was not surrender or become paralyzed. He studied the patterns, documented what he saw, and trusted that knowledge shared with those capable of receiving it had the power to change what was about to come. That is what we are doing here. And there is something spiritually fascinating in all of this that most channels completely overlook. Nostradamus's most precise prophecies do not speak only of collapse, they speak of what comes after the collapse. They speak of an awakening, of a new form of human organization emerging from the ashes of the old one. What exactly does he say about that awakening? That is what comes in the next section. And I guarantee that it is the piece of the puzzle you most need to hear. There is a question that many people ask quietly, but almost no one dares to say aloud. Are we living through the collapse of a system that we believed would last forever? This is not a conspiracy question. It is a legitimate question that the world's leading economists, geopolitical experts, and philosophers are asking with increasing urgency in 2026. And the answer, if you are honest about what you observe around you, is uncomfortable. The global financial system has operated for years on a foundation of debt that no previous generation would have considered sustainable. The world's most powerful nation-states owe amounts several times greater than their annual economic output, and the mechanisms that once maintained that unstable balance, interest rates, confidence in institutions, multilateral trade agreements, are being dismantled one by one. Nostradamus, in the Centuries, Quatrain 65, describes something that contemporary interpreters have called the Great Disorder of Currencies, a moment when the value of money becomes uncertain, when trade between nations fragments, when the ordinary person watches what they earn through years of work become worth a little less every day. That quatrain is 5 centuries old, and it describes with disturbing precision what millions of people are experiencing in their own pockets this very year. But here is what is truly important. Spiritual traditions from around the world, from Tibetan Buddhism to Jewish Kabbalah, from the Hindu tradition to the teachings of the indigenous peoples of the Americas, all share a central idea that the modern world has forgotten. Collapses are not the end. They are transformations. The tarot, one of the oldest symbolic systems in the West, has a card called the Tower. It shows a tall building being struck by lightning, with people falling from above. Most people see it as a card of catastrophe, but tarot masters teach something different. The tower does not destroy what is worth preserving. It destroys what was built on lies, on foundations that were never solid, and it frees the people who were trapped within structures that no longer served their highest purpose. That is exactly what Nostradamus saw in the period that many associate with 2026, not only collapse but liberation. Now, how does this connect specifically with Trump? There is something very few analysts are pointing out, and it completely changes the narrative presented by most of the media. From a symbolic and archetypal perspective, Trump is not simply a politician, he is the catalyst, the accelerator, the element that in chemistry is called a reagent, which does not necessarily create the reaction but causes it to happen faster and with greater intensity. The tensions he represents, economic inequality, the class resentment created by the globalizing system, the loss of cultural identity in entire communities, the discrediting of institutions, all existed before Trump and will exist after him. What the Trump phenomenon has done, and what Nostradamus appears to have seen, is that this catalyst would accelerate a process that was already underway, the collapse of the post-war world order. And that is neither inherently bad nor inherently good. It is a process of transformation that, like every great historical change, carries a real human cost and at the same time contains the seed of something new. The question each of us must ask is this: which side of that transformation do we want to be on? The side of those who cling in fear to what is collapsing, or the side of those who, with their eyes open, are building the foundations of what comes next? That is exactly what we are going to explore now, because Nostradamus, surprisingly, had much to say about the people who would spiritually survive this breaking point, and what he said will resonate with you in ways you do not expect. We have reached the heart of everything, Trump's final destiny, according to the prophecies of Nostradamus. And before you think this is only about politics, I want you to listen carefully to what I am about to say, because there is a spiritual dimension to this that goes far beyond who wins or loses in Washington. The most debated quatrains in specialized circles during 2025 and 2026 are those of Century 4, specifically quatrains 14 and 68. In them, Nostradamus describes what he calls the fall of the great Lord of the West, not through assassination, not through military defeat, but through something far more subtle and, in a certain way, more devastating, a fall caused by his own decrees. In Quatrain 14, The words most consistently translated by interpreters speak of a leader who, in his attempt to restore a past order, unleashes forces he cannot control. His own economic decisions, his own breaks with historic allies, and his own confrontations with the institutions surrounding him create a whirlwind from which he can no longer escape. In Quatrain 68, the image is even more specific: a great man who falls not by the sword of an enemy, but beneath the weight of his own contradictions, and around his fall, the markets of the West tremble. Is that happening in 2026? Look at the real data. The tariff policies implemented since 2025 have generated a chain reaction that is affecting economic growth in the United States in ways that even the administration's own economists did not anticipate. American federal debt has reached levels that make the word sustainable almost impossible to utter seriously. And Washington's historic allies, from Europe to the Asia-Pacific region, are making strategic decisions that would have been unthinkable 5 years ago. But there is something I want you to understand clearly. This video is neither an attack on Trump nor a defense of Trump. Trump, in this analysis, is a symbol of something larger. He is the archetypal representation of a civilization's final attempt to return to the past before the future becomes inevitable. He is the type of figure history produces during great moments of transition, in every empire and every civilization. Rome had its figures. The British Empire had its figures. And now the American order that dominated the 20th century has its own. This is neither good nor bad, it is the pattern. And Nostradamus saw it. Now, what exactly does he say about what comes afterward? Because this is what I most want you to hear. In Century X, the final book of his prophecies, Nostradamus reserved some of his most hopeful quatrains. After the images of conflict and collapse, after the leaders who fall and the markets that tremble, a completely different language appears. He speaks of a period of renewal, of new alliances that will not be based on military power, but on something he describes as the law of the heart, of a reordering in which nations once considered peripheral find a new leading role, of a generation born in chaos, but building with wisdom. Perhaps it sounds utopian, but it also sounds like what every serious spiritual tradition has always taught, that after the deepest darkness comes the most powerful light, that great collapses are not the end of human history, but the painful birth of a new stage of collective consciousness. And here is the question I want you to carry with you as you leave this section. If this is a moment of historic transition, if we are standing on the threshold between a world that is ending and one that is being created, what role do you want to play in that process? Because the answer to that matters more than any prophecy, and we are going to explore it now. There is something no prophet can take away from you: your ability to choose how you respond to what is coming. And this is where the conversation about Nostradamus becomes truly powerful. Because if his prophecies are warnings rather than decrees, then the purpose of studying them is not to become paralyzed by fear. It is exactly the opposite. It is to prepare yourself, elevate yourself, and become someone who navigates the storm with clarity while others are swept away by it. The great spiritual traditions of humanity have something in common that is worth remembering at this moment. They have always taught that periods of chaos are the most fertile for the growth of the soul. Buddhism speaks of dukkha, the suffering inherent in existence, not as an act of cruelty by the universe, but as the condition that makes awakening possible. The Jewish tradition, forged in exile and persecution, produced some of the deepest philosophies in human history. Christianity was born during one of the most politically violent periods of the ancient world. Moments of rupture do not destroy human spirituality. They concentrate it, purify it, and make it necessary in a way that comfortable times never can. And 2026, with all its tensions and uncertainty, is exactly that kind of moment. So what is the spiritual map for navigating it? The first thing is this: distinguish between information and wisdom. We live in the age of the most abundant information in human history. At any moment, you can access thousands of analyses, predictions, theories, and prophecies. The problem is not a lack of information. The problem is a lack of frameworks for processing it without allowing it to consume you. Wisdom, unlike information, does not activate your nervous system, it calms it. It gives you perspective. It reminds you that what is happening now, however dramatic it may feel, is part of a larger pattern that humanity has faced before and survived. The second thing is equally crucial: Keep your focus on what you can control. Empires fall, economic systems transform, political leaders come and go, but in your everyday life, you have a real sphere of influence. Your family, your community, the people around you, and the decisions you make every day about how to live, how to produce, how to relate to others, and how to spend your energy. During great moments of historic transformation, the people who make the difference are not always the visible leaders. They are ordinary people who, through their everyday decisions, create new realities from the bottom up. The third thing, and this is taught by virtually every spiritual tradition without exception, is to cultivate awareness of the present moment. Fear lives in the future. Guilt lives in the past. Wisdom lives in the present. When you anchor yourself in the present, when you develop the ability to see clearly what is truly in front of you instead of what your mind projects ahead, you gain access to a kind of calm that cannot be shaken by any external collapse. That is not naivete, it is the most advanced form of preparation that exists. And there is something else I want to add, something that connects directly with what Nostradamus wrote about those who would spiritually survive the great periods of transition. He described them not as the strongest, the richest, or the most powerful. He described them as those who kept the inner flame alive while everything around them was being consumed. The inner flame. What does that mean in practical terms for you in 2026? It is your purpose, your connection to something greater than the news cycle and political noise, your ability to ask yourself what you came into this world to do and not lose sight of it, regardless of what is happening outside. That is exactly what we are going to explore in the next section, because Nostradamus's final message is not one of fear, it is one of hope that is surprisingly specific and deeply relevant to you right now. Here is the secret that almost every analysis of Nostradamus completely ignores. His prophecies of collapse are always accompanied by prophecies of rebirth, always, without exception, because Nostradamus was not a prophet of the apocalypse, he was a cartographer of time. And good cartographers do not only show the cliffs, they also show the paths around them. In his writings about the period that many associate with 2026 and the years that follow, there is a sequence of quatrains that researchers have called the trilogy of renewal. They are the final quatrains of centuries I, 6, and X. And their content is so different in tone from the previous prophecies that some scholars questioned whether they were written by the same author. They were written by the same author, and this is what they say. After the great reordering of the West, after the man who divided a nation has completed his cycle, what Nostradamus calls in his coded language the new Council of Nations will emerge. Not a world government in the sense that some fear, but a new form of cooperation among nations that will have learned, through the pain of disintegration, that interdependence is not a choice but a condition of existence. Do you see what that implies? The collapse of the current order itself is the teacher that will make something more collaborative, more mature, and more conscious possible, like an adolescent who must crash into the wall of their own bad decisions before being ready to hear the advice that was always there. Humanity as a whole appears to be going through that process now, and there are encouraging signs amid the chaos. Local and regenerative economic movements are growing around the world at a speed no analyst predicted. Communities that had been atomized by decades of consumerist individualism are rediscovering the value of neighborliness, cooperation, and social bonds. Non-dogmatic forms of spirituality, those that do not depend on a religious institution but on the direct experience of the sacred, are undergoing an extraordinary resurgence, especially among younger generations. Science at its most advanced frontiers, quantum physics, contemplative neuroscience, and systems biology, is reaching conclusions that increasingly resemble what ancient spiritual teachers taught. All of that is happening now, right now, amid the political noise and economic chaos. And Nostradamus, in his quatrains of renewal, describes something remarkably similar, an age when the knowledge of heaven and the knowledge of earth will unite, when those who sought inner truth will also find outer truth, when the new language of nations will be the language of shared necessity. 5 centuries before quantum physics, 5 centuries before the internet, 5 centuries before the global consciousness movements that today, in 2026, have more participants than ever before in human history. How is it possible that someone who lived in the 10th century saw this? There are several possible answers. Perhaps he was an extraordinarily sophisticated observer of human patterns. Perhaps he had access to ancient traditions of knowledge that are now lost. Perhaps his mind, during those contemplative states before dawn with a bowl of water in front of him, accessed something that spiritual traditions call the unified field of consciousness. We do not know for certain. What we do know is that his warnings, when read honestly, are not messages of despair, they are messages of preparation. And the question that naturally concludes this entire analysis, the question Nostradamus seems to have asked humanity through his quatrains, is the same question the universe is asking you at this moment. Are you ready for what is coming? Not with fear, but with awareness. That is the conclusion of everything we have explored today, and that is exactly where I want to take you now. We have reached the end of this journey, and before we close, I need you to hold on to something that goes far beyond everything we have analyzed today. I need you to hold on to a truth that is uncomfortable, liberating, and transformative at the same time. The most powerful prophecy in this universe is not written in any book from the 10th century. It is written within you, in your decisions, in your values, in the way you choose to relate to the world amid uncertainty, in what you do with your time when no one is watching, in the quality of presence you bring to the people who matter to you, and in the kind of reality you build through every daily choice. That, and not the quatrains of Nostradamus, is the prophecy that matters most in your life. Everything we have explored today, the collapse of the global order, the predictions about leaders and markets, the historic cycles that Nostradamus documented with a precision that continues to astonish researchers 5 centuries later, all of it has a purpose that goes far beyond intellectual fascination or entertainment. The purpose is this: to remind you that great moments of historic transformation do not happen only to the powerful. They are not exclusively matters for presidents, central banks, or diplomatic summits. They happen to everyone, to you, to your family, to your community, to the people you love, and to those you have not yet met but with whom you share this planet during this unique and unrepeatable moment. And the way each ordinary person responds to those moments is what, collectively and silently, determines what kind of world emerges on the other side of collapse. Think about it through this image. When the Roman Empire collapsed, it was not merely a political tragedy recorded in books. It was the moment when thousands of small communities, monasteries hidden in the mountains, schools of philosophy in cities no one remembers, and local trade networks woven by people whose names never entered history began quietly building the foundations of what would come afterward: the medieval world, the Renaissance, modern science. Everything you now take for granted has its roots in the decisions of anonymous people who, amid the chaos of Rome's collapse, chose to preserve knowledge, keep their communities united, and continue living with integrity when doing so was more difficult than surrendering. Those anonymous people were, without question, more important to what followed than most of the emperors whose names do appear in history books. You can be one of those people right now, in 2026, in this exact moment we are living through. You do not need a university degree. You do not need millions of social media followers. You do not need political power or financial capital. You need clarity about what truly matters when everything superficial has been swept away by the winds of change. You need the courage to live according to that clarity, even when the world around you is moving in the opposite direction. You need the patience to plant seeds whose fruits you may not see within your own lifetime, and you need the deep humility to recognize that you are not alone in this process. There are millions of people on this planet who, at this very moment, in different languages and completely different cultural contexts, are awakening to the same questions as you. What is my true purpose in all of this? How do I want to live in a world that is changing faster than I can process? What do I truly want to preserve from what exists today? And what am I honestly willing to let go of so that something more authentic and more just can take its place? Those questions do not have easy answers. They will not be answered by any prophet, any political leader, or any YouTube video. But asking them now, seriously and without escaping into distraction, places you in a completely different position from most people who are moving through this same historic moment without questioning anything. Nostradamus saw many dark things. We have examined them in detail today. But he also saw something else, something the headlines never mention because it does not generate clicks through fear or outrage. He saw that in every period of great historic transformation, what he described in his quatrains with language that any spiritual teacher today would immediately recognize began to emerge: a community of awakened people. Not perfect people, not enlightened people in the fairy tale sense, but genuinely awakened people. People who were not asleep through compulsive consumption, through fear injected from screens, or through the narrative of the moment that always divides the world into perfect heroes and villains. People who had chosen, through effort and daily practice, to keep alive the flame of a consciousness deeper than the constant noise on the surface. And that community, small at first, invisible to those who write the daily news, practically undetectable to algorithms that measure relevance by the volume of the shouting, was the community planting through their lives, through their quiet example, and through their everyday consistency the seeds of the next world. That is the true legacy of studying Nostradamus at this moment. Not fear of collapse, not anxiety about the future, not paralysis before what you cannot control, but a concrete, practical, and urgent invitation to personal awakening. And I want to close with what, for me, is the most important thing of everything we have shared today. If you made it this far, if you listened to all of this with genuine attention, if at any point in this video something resonated within you in a way that went beyond intellectual curiosity, then you are already part of that community Nostradamus saw emerging during moments of rupture. You are already someone who chose to ask questions instead of passing by without seeing, someone who chose depth when the surface was more comfortable, someone who is searching, even imperfectly and with more doubts than certainties, for a truer understanding of what it means to live consciously during this extraordinary and turbulent moment in human history. That is no small thing. In truth, that is everything. Because the universe is not asking you to save the world in a grand and visible way. It is asking you for something more difficult and more beautiful at the same time. It is asking you to be authentic in your specific corner of it. It is asking you to live with consistency between what you think, what you say, and what you do, to care with genuine attention for the people close to you, to continue asking the questions that matter even when you do not have all the answers and even when no one around you seems to be asking them, and to always remember, especially on the most difficult days, that the chaos you see outside is not only a threat, but also an invitation to deep order, real clarity, and true peace, which you can only build within yourself and which no external collapse can take away from you once you have found it. Nostradamus warned of this from the 15th century. But today, in 2026, you have something he never had, the ability to receive that warning with full awareness, the freedom to choose your response, and the real possibility, not theoretical but practical and everyday, of becoming an active part of the world that is coming instead of merely being swept along by it. Use it well. Protect it. It is the most valuable thing you have. If this content truly reached you, if something you heard today moved something within you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Sometimes the right message at the right moment changes the entire course of a person's life. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, and activate the notification bell so you do not miss what is coming next. Together, we will continue exploring every week the deepest mysteries the universe has to show us. See you in the next one.